career technical education. I don't have to tell y'all how important that is, but having some funds to promote that and to get our students educated about it hopefully will be helpful in getting some students in the programs that fit their profiles. We've also been concentrating on funding some things for educators in the classrooms. In the last 60 days, we've awarded 24 $500 classroom grants for $12,000 directly to educators with the help of Chelco. Also, $2,000 AT&T grant to Pryor Middle School for an engineering-related program, $2,000 to Crestview teacher through the AT&T grant, and a $5,000 Motorola grant to Fort Walton Beach High School. In addition, we've approved cash awards for the Teacher of the Year program and ceremony and the Educational Support Professional of the Year program. Beyond the county, we have some reach as well. We're a member of the statewide consortium of Florida Educational Foundations. Recently, that group, and specifically the Okaloosa Public School Foundation, coordinated relief for some Hurricane Michael problems in our neighboring counties and tried to get some district resources over there to help them in that problem. Mr. Kelly is executive director of the CFEF and chairs our professional development area. And that group rolled out a new license plate recently. I understand there's some choreography at this point of some sort. But if you haven't seen the new license plate, it replaces the Apple that's been around for a long time. We hope you'll encourage participation in that program because a little bit of that tag fee does go to support our foundation. So looking at the future, we want to continue to operate at a high level and maintain gold level status within the Take Stock program. We want to grow the number of Take Stock students within the district. We want to increase the direct grant funding we're able to provide to educators. And we want to be your partner in bringing innovative solutions to some of the challenges you face. I know funding's an issue not just in these STEM-related programs and grants, but across the things you consider, and we want to be an advocate and helper in any way we can there. So I think I've survived my portion, other than Dr. White's promised me a long grilling at this point. But we do appreciate the opportunity to interact and kind of update you on where we are and what we've been doing, and hopefully give you some reassurance that things are on a good footing there. And any questions, we'd be glad to.
Yes, sir. Well, Mr. Bennett, it was a great presentation, and we appreciate you and your supporters and friends that are here and work so hard on the Take Stock Foundation and, of course, the Foundation for the County. Board members, do you have any questions or thoughts you'd like to share? Because now's your chance. He's at the podium.
Mrs. Jackson and board members, as you know, when we reorganized, you chose me to be, or elected me to be on this foundation board, and I've met with them a couple of times, and I am so excited. The professionals you see there and some others, they are really doing some wonderful things, you know, of course, with Mr. Kelly's direction and so forth. And he may kind of regret I'm on there because I've already bent his ear on ideas. Every time I'm emailing him, what if we did this, what if we did that? So I'm excited about this and working with them. Great things are happening. I got an opportunity to be one of the members who looked at some grants that we just did with the Chelco and the matching grants. These teachers are doing some fabulous things in the classroom, and it's exciting to have the funds to give them for these projects. So I was allowed to do that, which I was excited about. I'm ready to get my new license plate put on my car, and I hope everyone will, and we'll be getting that out to everyone. So I'm excited. The foundation is doing great work, and these individuals in our community are going to make the difference and way it goes in this next year. And so I think we're in good hands, and I appreciate that I'm on this committee and I'm eager to work with them in the next year.
Very good. Thank you for your service.
I enjoy it.
All right. Board members, Mr. Bryant?
Yes, I have a comment and a question. And
sure.
My first comment is to my fellow board members over there. It was an honor to serve for 2 years, and I echo Ms. Ivanchek's sentiments there that these folks here work tirelessly to make this foundation work, and you know, so it was an honor to serve with y'all for 2 years, and I'm excited to hear how excited you are to serve. Yeah. So with that being said, I also would like to point out at our last board meeting, my fellow board members graciously approved money that was spent on computers that are going to Laurel Hill and Crestview High School. Now that was about $9,000, almost $10,000. But what I didn't mention was that the foundation actually provided $10,000 more that was going to help pay for all that. So with the money that was approved by the board from my funds and the foundation, we were able to get those computers, and I believe they are up and running right now in Laurel Hill and Crestview. My question is what kind of solutions can y'all bring to help support the district? What are some things that y'all are talking about?
Well, we want to be your collaborator and friend, not your director necessarily in that regard. We do have a lot of concern about the capital needs in the district and the way to address those, and we want to be part of that solution. We don't pretend to tell you what that solution is, but we want to help make that happen whatever way there is, because it's not news to you, but we have a very aging infrastructure where Dr. White used to teach me tennis and things at Choctawhatchee High School a long time ago.
Wait, did you say that Dr. White is aging?
No.
That's what I heard.
Strike that from the record. The county's infrastructure obviously is an issue for everybody, though, and if we can be part of helping with that effort in any way, we'd be glad to do so. Like I said, we don't have any other secret or unknown answers, but we want to be a part of making that happen. However,
We
that
certainly
will go.
appreciate that. And along those lines, Mr. McInnes, I think you work with the foundation too.
Yes, sir.
And so that would correlate in terms of some kind of joint effort to make sure that we're all in the areas that we're supposed to be and in the areas where we must be
Right.
versus where we shouldn't be.
Right, and we
So-
recognize the importance of that. In fact, I have had a conversation with him and asked him for some
There you go. Good.
outlines on where we can be involved with
very
advocacy and
I
things of that
understand.
nature. So.
Excellent. Any thoughts, board members? Mr.
I'll
Dustin?
just have one comment. I want to thank all of y'all. Time is the most valuable currency that any of us have, and you're spending a limited amount of currency on this issue, and we appreciate that a lot. And thanks.
Thank you. We appreciate all y'all do for the district. Anything else, Mr. Kelly? This is your agenda item.
Well, let me just say, again, I so appreciate the update. And I'm hoping that we can continue this kind of information, because this was
Yeah.
very, very helpful. And I think some of the information contained on those slides, if there were a way that superintendent, you might consider that might be a link perhaps on the school district's website, if that's permissible, Mr. McInnes. I think that information would be very helpful and important for public members to have access to on a regular basis, to see the kinds of good things that all of you folks are doing for the children in this county. We very much appreciate you.
Well, thank you. We chose now because we wanted the new board to be in place. In the fall, we wanted to have a conversation, but we felt it most appropriate to be with the board that would be serving going forward. So whenever y'all think is appropriate. After this, whether it's the beginning of the year or the school year or the beginning of the calendar year, we'd be glad to come back and meet at any time. So.
All right. Very
Thank
good.
you.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. All right, with no other questions?
Yay.
Yeah, that's your cue. That's right.
We understand.
Well, they got to go to work. All right, folks, let's go ahead now and continue through the various items on the agenda. That was 7.1. So 7.2 is in-county travel paid for the period of November 22nd through December the 12th, 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.3, out-of-county travel paid for the period of November 22nd through September the 12th, 2018, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.4, report on significant financial trends and findings in the 2016-2017 fiscal year audits of district school boards, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. And of course, there is a report attached.
And Mrs. Scallon and I talked about this, and if you have questions, she is fully prepared, or if you would like for her to make a statement, maybe summarizing what some of the trends are.
I would ask that she come up and explain, because this did kind of make the paper before the holidays and all that, so I think this would be appropriate for her to at least.
Good morning. Actually, what this report is a summarization of the top 10. It's more than 10, but the top audit findings that happened in multiple school districts in the year 16-17, and of course I know it's 18-19, but it takes them a considerable amount of time to gather that data and to get it in a presentation form. And so they issue a report, and when I say they, the Auditor General issues a report, and then each school district is required to submit that on their school board agenda so that the school board and the public is aware of what are common findings in a particular audit year. And so that's basically what that is. That's not necessarily specifically to us as our audit.
Right. It's all school boards in the whole state of Florida. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But my thought was it shows, you know, that every school district has findings on there, so, and some are common.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing that it shows sometimes is just like when you get into our own particular audit, and let's say we have an audit finding, whether it's on best and brightest, whether it's on grandfathered salary schedules, when you look at the compilation of common audit findings, you see other school districts who have the same audit finding as you may have. So therein, that tells you that it's not a unique situation with one school district, that they may not have known what they were doing or what the law says. And when you see
Or that the law might have been unclear. Ms.
That's
Scott.
correct.
And
And
we
we-
are experiencing that. We've had to even ask for an Attorney General's opinion on what the law says.
Exactly, and typically when you see multiple districts that have the same audit finding, then that's going to tell you that either the law was not clear, or that the communication from the state was not clear, or that there was no communication from the state as to a particular requirement. So it kind of helps you, understand the broad picture.
Well, that was a great outline. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Any other questions, board members?
Quite interesting to read.
Oh, yeah, and lengthy.
Yes.
And while I'm standing here, the next one is the audit of the SBA, so I'll just go ahead
Okay.
and mention
You
that to you.
wanna go ahead and let's move
Okay.
forward?
And what that is of course, we're a participant in the investing money in the State Board of Administration, and so every 2 years they are audited. And then that, by the Auditor General, that audit is presented, and each district, again, is required to place that on their agenda so board members and public see what the audit findings or the conditions, financial conditions of the SBA is, to give you assurance that where we have our money invested, that they are in a good financial position, and that they have an unmodified opinion, which means that everything from a financial perspective looks good. So that's what that is.
And just for public interest, it's not that we have so much money that we're able to invest it. Would you just talk about, just briefly, what it is that's invested?
Basically, and that's a good question, basically, no, we do not have investment money, but what we do is we have cash flow. So it depends on the particular time of the year, like what just occurred, we get tax receipts, and so we short-term temporarily invest that money. And of course, for us as a school district and most governmental agencies, your first goal is going to be to liquidity, safety of your money investment, and then being able to access it quickly. So we just temporarily invest money, and the only money that we have that we invest for any length of time is our reserve money, because of course, and we're required by the state to at least have a 3% reserve, and so that money's invested. But we also, our investments, if you want to call investments, they're short-term investments, it is diversified. So it's not, after we had the SBA that had the trouble back some years ago, all districts began diversifying their investments. So of course we did that. We have an investment policy, and we put those short-term investments in instruments that are safe.
And what about schools? Do schools have any funds invested in this SBA account?
Schools, because they have their internal funds, and then and that money is in bank accounts, but they have the option. They have their option of whether to purchase a short-term temporary CD with the bank or whether to invest their money with SBA. Now, typically what happens is SBA is going to give you a higher rate of return than the bank is, plus it gives you the ability to draw your money out, call one day and get it the next day, whereas when you invest with a bank, if you do a CD or whatever you do, then you have to commit for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, and lots of times that's not feasible because the money's needed.
Well, in my opinion, it's good financial stewardship of the resources that are provided to us to have those funds invested so that they don't just sit idle.
Absolutely.
That in fact that we are generating a small amount of interest on the investment that our
Yes.
people have made in our schools and in our school district. Mr. Destin, board members?
Just one curious question that may just show my ignorance. When you invest in a CD, FDIC guarantees your investment up to a certain amount. Is there an equivalent guarantee in this fund?
You mean as far as what's what you're insured for?
Right.
Okay, I cannot remember off the top of my head, but it is like up to $10 million that you're,
And we don't put more
40
than 10
million.
million
It's
with them, right?
it's 40 million, 40 million. 40
I wish
million.
we had that.
Yeah, it's 40 million. I correct myself. Yeah,
May
and that's
I-
why we would diversify.
Yes, ma'am. Ms.
May I
Jackson.
ask, and you may have said this when I had to step out, we've had a busy morning this morning, by the way. Rita, we receive a rating. Did you discuss that with the board, what our rating is currently?
On our bonds? Okay, our bond rating is a AA minus. Now, that is an excellent rating for a school district because the school district is, you are never going to get the highest bond rating there is. But yes, our bond rating is excellent, and especially in this day and time.
I thought that was
So,
important for you to
Yes,
hear
absolutely.
because that just speaks to the good financial management that Ms. Scallon and our finance department, they keep us straight, and I appreciate it, Rita. I know you've worked hard to make sure that we do not slip below certain levels, and that's only for our protection, and I appreciate that very much.
Well, and I appreciate that, but it's all of us as a team. It's the superintendent and the board giving direction. And when I say bond rating, it is a bond rating, but it is a rating from
Right.
Moody's and Finch. And basically, what it is if we were to go out to borrow money, that we would get a very, very good interest rate, just like in your personal credit. The higher your
Right.
credit score, the better your interest rate on a debt instrument is.
And basically, we're saying to creditors that we're a good avenue. We're a good choice to invest in
Absolutely.
because we have solid financials and we pay our bills.
Absolutely. We have no late
Right.
payments. We have no defaults.
That's right. Very good. Thank you, Ms. Scott. All right, so that was item 7.5, by the way. Unless there's any further questions, we'll just keep going. Consent agenda. 8.1 would be the approval. 8.2, approval of the minutes of student disciplinary hearings of December the 6th, 2018, minutes of special meeting of December the 6th, 2018, minutes of workshop meeting of December 6th, 2018, minutes of regular meeting of December 10th, 2018, recommended by the superintendent for approval.
I move to approve those.
Okay, and we'll do that Monday night, okay? Hopefully.
Okay.
8.3, Budget Amendment Number 3, fiscal year 2018-2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.4, monthly financial statement for November 2018, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And Ms. Scallon, I know you handed out to us a description of some of those funds and so forth, and I'm very grateful that you took what appears to be an immense amount of time to prepare that for us. Thank you. 8.5, school donations, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Dr. White, I would just like
Yes, sir.
to thank all of those in the business community or just the private citizens that are donating to our schools. And as you can see, it was a large amount, and also the Public School Foundation had that high dollar there too. But I'd just like to personally thank all of those who are helping our schools.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. All right, 8.6, invoices to be approved for payment, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.7, payroll warrant register and accounts payable warrant register for November 2018 totaling $25,729,519.11, and bank transfers for November 2018 totaling $4,180,000, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.8, authorization to appropriate federal impact aid funds and make a payment in the amount of $113,623 to charter schools and AMI Kids Emerald Coast, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Dr. White,
Yes, sir.
Ms. Jackson, would it be all right if Ms. Scallon came up and just kind of explained to the general public about federal impact aid and the charter schools here?
Okay, as y'all probably know, Okaloosa has a significant amount of land that is federally owned, either by military or other federal means. And so, with that being said, we do not receive property taxes for those parcels of land. So the military part, what happens is that we, in lieu of property taxes, we receive what's called federal impact aid dollars. Now, the federal impact aid dollars does not equate to what would be generated if it was privately owned property. But with that being said, so every student that we have that has some connection to the military, then we receive varying amounts of money for those students, and it depends on whether they're active duty, whether they're a contractor, whether they're living on federal property, all those kinds of things. So what happens is that we also share with the charter schools. They turn into us if they have any kids that qualify, that fill out the federal impact aid card, as y'all all know, each year. And so however many students they have, based on whatever category they fall in, because there's like A through E category or I category, which is all different amounts of money. So then when we receive payment, then we allocate their portion of those funds to them.
All right, that answer?
Yes.
All right. Anything else? Thank you, Ms. Scallon. All right, 8.9. RFP 18-01 401A 403B Special Pay Plan, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And Superintendent, I see you have some folks here. I don't know if board members might have questions, or if you're...
Vince is unable to be with us today.
I understand.
So if you could hold those questions.
Okay, I see Mr. Frakes in attendance.
Oh, there he
Yep,
is.
yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm so
Okay.
sorry.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Frakes, for coming up.
Yes.
We hadn't got that far yet, but since you're here. Board members, do you have any questions or items you'd like to talk to Mr. Frakes about?
Well,
Mr. Destin, I think.
Oh, I was just
Well,
gonna.
just to clarify on this,
Yeah.
at this point, at the point we are in the RFP process is that we are simply requesting the board's approval to proceed with negotiations with the top-ranked
Right.
respondent.
Right, this is not an award.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Not at this point.
Right.
Well, that'll be brought back after that negotiation
Okay.
process has been completed, so.
All right, thank you,
All right.
Mr. Frakes. Board members, anything else?
Well,
Mr. Bryant?
that's what I was going to just for, again, this is for the general public to know,
Mhm.
because when they see something like this on the agenda, what's special pay plan?
Special pay plan, that is for, special pay would qualify as vacation pay or sick leave that an employee would receive at the time that they separate from the district. So that accumulates in this 403B program would be the landing spot for that money. Those dollars would come to them, and then it would be distributed by their, either a lump sum, they can annuitize it, different, it's an investment vehicle that's provided for them. This RFP is for the administrator of that program.
Basically, this would be a payment for monies owed.
Correct.
To these employees.
Correct. Someone accumulates that over their course of their tenure with the school district, and when they separate, they receive that, they are paid out that money at that time.
As they are owed.
That's correct.
Like sick pay.
Sick pay,
Right.
yes, sick leave and vacation time, that's accrued over their tenure.
We can't all run down and sign up for the special pay, is what I'm reading.
That's right. All right?
All right, thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Frakes.
Thank you, Rose.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent. All right, moving on to 8.10. Renewal of ITB 15-06 Fire Sprinkler Inspection Services, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.11, renewal of ITB 16-04 Network Infrastructure Equipment E-rate, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And board members, these start getting a little complicated on some of the technology things, but Mr. Mitchell's here, and if you have any questions, he's available. Although I know he spoke with me, he may have spoken to, okay, very good.
I just
very good.
appreciate the call and
Yeah.
the in-depth descriptor of each one of these. Thank you, Eric.
Right.
Yeah, a lot to cover.
Yeah, and for members of the public, these attachments are on the agenda, and read them at your own risk, because they're quite involved.
Or late at night.
Right. All right, 8.12, renewal of ITB 18-09 telecommunication services for Wide Area 1, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.13, renewal of ITB 18-10 Internet Services, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.14, renewal of ITB 18-17 Session-Initiated Protocol, SIP, Trunk and Transport, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.15, exempted purchase, Site Improve, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And this one was quite interesting. Board members, if you have any questions that haven't maybe been answered already, now would be a time.
I think Mr. Mitchell did a good job of explaining yesterday, so.
Well, of course, in there, again, there's an attachment on this particular item as well. All right, 8.16, scheduled service agreements, Train, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.17, contract modification and extension agreement between CACI NSS, Inc., Federal, and the School Board of Okaloosa County for the IT seat management outsourcing agreement, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Chairman, and Eric, you can explain, this is where we are extending the 5-year contract, or no?
Yes.
So Mike might not have picked that up, Mr. Mitchell. The answer is to Mr. Destin's question, yes,
Yes.
this is an extension of a
Mhm.
5-year contract.
This is the original seat management contract That contract is a 5-year contract with the option for a 5-year renewal, and this is where we're exercising our 5-year renewal.
And when we talked about, I believe it was the Chromebooks, there was going to be an increase of so much per device.
Right, it ends up being about $1.35 per device. It's an increase, and this is something that we have worked out with Teleforce and CACI for the purpose of managing those devices.
And we have 7,000 of those devices or so?
Roughly, that's correct.
So we're bumping up to around 90,000.
Just a hair under 100,000, that's correct.
And the only alternative to that would be to renegotiate or re-advertise for an RFP?
Or to eliminate the seat, yes, sir. There are a couple of options, but yes.
Yeah. And the seats, we're talking about the computers, and there's a refresh on seats under the contract every how many years?
3 years.
And the Chromebooks are purchased at different times, so they're refreshing at different times?
That is correct. Everything's done annually for the most part, but we try to do as much of the student work as we can during the summer. We end up refreshing between 3,000 and 4,000 seats every summer.
Okay, so that's a pretty good turnaround.
Yes, sir.
And the only difference in this and what we're doing is going to be about the $98,000 increase.
That's correct.
In cost.
Yes, and that comes specifically from us working with Teleforce and their requests for the fact that when we originally developed the seat with them, it was brand new. We really didn't know how it was going to be managed. We knew about how to manage it, but we didn't know what that was going to involve as far as manpower and resources. And as we've come to learn from doing it, that this is a device that needs to be adjusted.
And the total contract for this seat agreement is how much?
The entire contract?
Right. I'm trying to think of what the percentage increase is on this 98,000.
The exact total for the total contract, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I want to say it's, when we originally did it, when I first brought it to the board, it was around the $6 million mark, but I don't believe we're quite at that anymore.
Okay. And you guys are satisfied that this increase is justifiable? And
Yes, sir.
And that we should pay it, not go renegotiate the seat management contract?
That's correct. We're satisfied that this request is justifiable, and we're happy to renew this agreement with them.
Okay, thanks.
And I would say, Mr. Chairman, they've kept me abreast as we've gone through this. In fact, Mr. Horton was in my office just a day ago talking about that little bit of increase that we had for those Chromebooks, because they were concerned about that. And they have, I think you've worked well with this provider to come up with a contract that you feel is fair. They have assured me that they feel comfortable with this going forward. So to answer your question,
And
I've asked the same question.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And broadly, we've been tasked by the superintendent and obviously, at least implicitly by the board, to get the most best devices in our students' hands at the least possible cost. And I think looking over the last several years, we've been able to extensively increase the number of devices with Teleforce's help and keep the cost flat or decreased. And so whereas in this particular instance with this particular device, you might see a slight increase in that particular cost, overall, in the course of the agreement with Teleforce, you'll see lower costs, more devices, and so we're pleased at this point where we are in terms of being able to bring those devices to students and teachers.
Well, and can you just talk for a moment along those lines about Chromebooks and I think many of us understand this, but it may be the public might not.
Sure.
Why Chromebooks and not notebook computers? For example, what if all of these 5,000 Chromebooks had been notebook computers, and what the difference might have been?
Well, you know, the seat for a laptop computer or something that's got some storage capability on it at one time was triple the cost of a Chromebook in the contract, and now it's approximately double. And so what students need, what teachers say students need, is accessibility to the internet, accessibility to software programs through single sign-on, the ability to just click and be there. And so the Chromebook provides us with a great, durable, solution, so a student doesn't need to store their PowerPoint or their report on a device anymore. They can store it in the cloud. Every student in the district has an unlimited amount of Google Drive storage space, and so we really just need a window or a portal to get to the internet, to those programs that students and teachers need. And those devices, just to add on to it, are also used and accepted for FSA online testing, which we do paper-based in elementary now, but through the secondary level, we use Chromebooks extensively. And the low relative cost of those gives us the ability to put more devices in schools so that there are fewer carts moving around and teachers sharing. So that's where we are today.
Very good. Thank you.
Now I have to ask one more question. I hate to put Steve on the spot. He'll probably tell me about it in senior staff, but when we started, Steve, one of your goals was to increase the student to device, more devices for our students. And the last data I saw on that, where were we?
Well, of course, that's a moving target, and it sometimes can vary by school because the school principal
Yes.
may, through their PT organization, take on an initiative. So I'd be cautious to give you an answer to that directly today, but I can provide some information
Would you?
based on district devices. But we're in a at least doubly better place than we were a few years ago. So it's with Teleforce's partnership and the ability to drive the prices down that we're seeing despite this one small increase. We're in pretty good shape, and so I think we've always wanted that demand for devices to come from the classrooms, and so we felt like if curriculum, and they do a great job of putting out programs, teachers work to develop resources and things like that, and when that need develops in the classroom, it's a lot better than just saying, here, everybody take a device, and then some of them end up in the closet. So we've been working our way slowly towards adding those devices, and we think the appetite for them is still great, but it's driven again from the classroom level.
And I think it's important to note for the public and for this board, that has been an ongoing goal that these guys have had. And I think it's important to understand our capital money has not, gone through the roof, so to speak. So they had to figure out with Tom and Teleforce and this group how we were going to increase that. Now that's quite a trick if you increase something and you don't have any money to do it. But Teleforce has been more than willing to work with us on this, and I appreciate this because I know there were a lot of discussions that went into this, and Dustin's here as well, and it's a point of pride for me, for these guys to have figured this out and figured out a way to do it, and I do appreciate it, all of you. Tom, you too, I do.
Well, having had some of them as students, I know they're smart.
Well, one of
It
the
wasn't
things
hard
that
for them.
Mr. Mitchell said that I found very interesting, having not been that far from the classroom, is that we're seeing less and less desktop situation. And as a teacher, I know we had great labs, but you couldn't get to the lab or get signed into the lab and all that. So now we've got those Chromebooks coming in, which I was able to use with students, and I think it's great. You guys are doing a terrific job, and I think the public would be impressed at that device to student ratio that we have, considering our limited budget. So thank you for working that out and working that deal out, because it's certainly an advantage to those students.
Thank you, Ms. Vanchek. And I have one last question. Does this renewal contract still provide for teacher notebook laptops and refreshing them?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Every 3 years.
All right, good.
Just one further question, Chairman, if I may. And I want to congratulate you guys on making the transition over to the Chromebooks that give you the access you need and not spend the kind of money that we would have had to spend. The $98,000, is that over the term of the 5-year contract, or is that per year?
It's annual.
Okay, so that's $500,000 over the 5-year. Okay, thanks.
Anything else, gentlemen?
Nope.
All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, so that was 8.17. All right, 8.18, Educational Broadband Service, EBS, Transfer Lease Agreement. between the School Board of Okaloosa County and Fixed Wireless Holdings, LLC, presented by Mr. Eric Mitchell, Director of MIS and Instructional Technology, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And Mr. McInnes, I know you advised us sometime back.
Yes, sir.
In your involvement in this particular matter as well.
Right. Board members, you'll remember that the board authorized us to retain Attorney Todd Gray, who is an FCC attorney in Washington. He also, across the country, is one of the foremost attorneys dealing with the negotiation of these broadband educational leases. He has worked, and you'll remember that we had asked your permission to let him discuss with Sprint the potential for a new long-term lease. The current lease, which was for a 20-year term, is within about a window about 18 to 24 months from being concluded, and Sprint was prepared to discuss a renewal and replacement of that lease early before they got to that time frame. Mr. Gray was able to negotiate what he has assured us is a very competitive rate for these channels. And what this is, board members, the school board holds an FCC license for 4 educational broadcast channels. The Public Schools Foundation also holds a license for 4 of these EBS channels. And Sprint, through its subsidiary Fixed Wireless Holdings, has negotiated a new lease. This lease would pick up all 4 channels. The previous lease had 3 of the channels. They had asked about picking up the 4th one, and that was certainly available and has increased the revenue here. So under this new lease, and there will be an application to the FCC that's required to approve this long-term lease as the new lease, but the term of the lease will travel with the license, and as that license is renewed, this lease will renew automatically up to a limit of 30 years. That will be the ending term. The lease that's expiring was a 20-year lease. This will be a 30-year lease. And in regard to that, the monthly income to the district for the first year will be $2,100. This lease has an automatic 1% annual increase factor built into it, and so the fee schedule shows you what that increase will be annually. Those same rates will apply to the foundation. The foundation board has already approved the lease for their channels and are simply awaiting the school board's action on this one because Sprint would like to renew all 8 at one time. In addition to that, because of the renewal and the long-term nature of this, the company is prepared to make an upfront payment, one to the school board, a separate one to the foundation of $50,000 as a, if you will, a renewal upfront payment. The only kicker on that is that if we should, for any reason, or if the FCC should, for any reason, terminate this lease within the first 5 years of this term, then we would owe a pro rata payment back to them of that upfront payment. Once that 5-year period has passed, then that payment is totally earned and there is no more refund should this lease be terminated. The other points I want to raise to you here is the company leasing this will pay all of our fees for the FCC filings. They will pay all regulatory fees and any application fees that are required. So they're covering those expenses in order to get this approved and renewed, and going forward, if there are other FCC filings, they will take the lead in preparing those. Obviously, we have Mr. Gray available to review and consult with anything they're doing, but they will cover the cost of that. During the term of the lease, of course, they have asked for exclusive rights to these channels, so we would not be trying to lease them to someone else or let someone else use the channels. There is a small percentage of time on these channels that FCC requires that the school district maintain, and this lease covers that, so all the FCC requirements have been taken care of. Part of the way in which they will assist the district in meeting that requirement is there is also a $600 a month service credit that they're going to provide to the district. They will provide a separate similar credit to the foundation, and that will be through the Sprint networks and systems so that we can meet our FCC obligation to have some type of educational service for a minimal part of these channels. And they believe that that $600 figure will more than cover that commitment, and so that is going to be provided as well, so that your costs there will be covered. At the end of this term, and this is similar to the lease that was in place, they have asked for a first right of refusal in order to be able to yet again extend the lease, because these channels have become a very intricate part of their systems and networks. And so at the end of this lease, should we have someone else trying to lease it or whatever, they still will have a first right of refusal to be able to meet or match that deal and maintain the continuity of their channels and their services. The reserve capacity I've spoken to, this lease takes care of the district in that regard. And the service credit, we've talked about that, and I outlined for you what the monthly income is going to be. In the event that the FCC at any point does not renew these licenses, then provisions here have for this lease to automatically terminate. So you don't have any further obligation or liabilities beyond the time that FCC would terminate the licenses. And that's an outline of the proposed renewal. Mr. Gray has confirmed for us this is a very competitive renewal. He has negotiated hundreds of these leases and is satisfied. He got the numbers up from the initial offer to a point that he said were what he considered to be the market competitive rates. So he is recommending this, and I'm recommending it to you as well.
All right. So, Mr. McInnes, just briefly, and you and I talked about this some, these leases, where did they come from? The school board has leases with?
Well, about 20 years ago, this educational broadcasting channel setup was initiated, and we were first eligible to apply for these. And it's not just the school board. These channels are available to educational institutions across the country. And so at the time, 20 years ago, when we did this, at that time, Okaloosa-Walton Community College, they also picked up the same channels. All the other school districts picked them up. Their community colleges picked them up. Universities have picked these up. And so it's something we're eligible to apply to FCC to have. And the FCC regulations allow us to enter into contracts and leases commercially for the use of those by other parties. Okay. So that's how it got started.
We received these 20 years ago. And do we use them? Do we use them for anything? I mean,
well, at the current time, we do not, except for the minimal requirement, and that's why they've been under lease. Initially, there were some requirements, and we had other broadcasting going on. We still do broadcasting today, but not in the same way, and that's why this fourth channel can now be offered to be leased. But please, it's important to understand that this lease does meet the FCC requirements for any retained service on those channels.
Okay.
And Dr. White, I think I recall when I was over that department and when we actually received those FCC channels, that one of the purposes was DOE was giving districts a set of programs. And at that time, instructionally, teachers were able to tune in to channels and programs that matched their curriculum area. For instance, English or history or any of those things. And that then evolved into people bought into the Laserdisc players. And of course, that technology went out. So just use that as an example of the evolution of the use of the channels or not.
I think I hear you saying internet.
It's changed. Yeah, exactly.
Pretty much changed everything. Wow.
And this has been a good source of revenue for the district and the foundation. The communications side of this with the foundation, that money, Paul recommends the purchase of equipment and upgrades. And just like you heard this morning, they had made a contribution to Laurel Hill for some communications equipment there. So that's what that revenue from their side is used for. It just helps us to maintain some of those extras in the area of communication and technology that are helpful to the students.
And so if things worked out and this thing were to be approved, we technically wouldn't have to do this again for 30 years?
That's correct.
That'll work.
And speaking on that issue, Chairman, just outline the termination terms for me, Jeff.
The termination is tied basically to the FCC and to the licenses. So long as the FCC continues to renew those licenses, this lease will continue and will just roll over. Also, should the lessee, they have a right in here to make some termination from a business decision. Right. But from our standpoint, we're not otherwise using these licenses, and so that's one reason the 1% annual increase has been put into their rate so that we know it will keep increasing as we go forward. But that's kind of how the terminations might occur there, either based on FCC regulatory terminations or non-approvals, or the lessee, should they, for business reasons, be out of this business or not continue the services, they would have the ability to terminate.
Well, it appears that we're betting that for 30 years, we'll never ever have a need to use them.
Well, keep in mind, all of that is driven by the FCC regulations and what they allow and what they don't allow. If there are changes there that should have to put us somehow back into the business of having to broadcast, that would affect this lease.
Okay.
And there's room for that. But for right now, it's my understanding, I mean, the channels have been under lease for 20 years, and we have not had to go back and undo that. So we don't anticipate beyond the required FCC usage a need to do that.
Okay.
And along those lines, Mr. Destin, I spoke with Mr. Mitchell about, so somebody wants these channels and what do they use them for? And I think I remember, Mr. Mitchell, you said for cell phones, cellular communication. So that's what they're leasing from us, these channels for. So that makes sense to me.
Thank you,
Anything
Mr. Chairman.
else? All right, thank you, Mr. McInnes. All right, so moving on to 8.19, sale and disposal of surplus property, presented by Mr. Steve Bolton, Director of Facilities and Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.20, legislative budget request, LBR, for school buses to ease the traffic pattern along Herbert Field, La Rosa Elementary School corridor, presented by Mr. Henry Kelly, Program Director, Community Affairs, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I have a question about this.
All right, Ms. Manchek?
Did the board not try to do this before? Have we looked at this before? Not me, I wasn't on the board, but the board looked at this before, correct?
Yes, we did. And what happened, all of our contacts in Tallahassee assured us it was taken care of. There was a little snafu in the governor's office. It went to the governor's office. And my understanding is one of the aides in the office didn't understand what was supposed to happen with that. Henry's here and took it off.
Oh.
Well, our representatives in Tallahassee were somewhat upset. But now with the growth of Eglin and Hurlburt, they have assured us that we need to do this again, and we have the support of both Eglin, I believe, and Hurlburt. But Mr. Kelly can address that.
Welcome, Mr. Kelly, again.
Thank you, sir. In fact, I just received this yesterday. This is from, and I'll provide it to the secretary. This is from the Wing Commander for Special Operations Wing Commander. Colonel Dorman is the first mission support group. He couldn't be here this morning, but this is the base commander at Hurlburt supporting this project. We have reached out this time to ensure that we don't have any glitches in the governor's office. The Defense Task Force Initiative, which is a part of Enterprise Florida in Tallahassee, they are on board and writing letters of support for this. We've also received support from the various chambers of commerce. The Santa Rosa County Commissioners, I believe, will also, we've asked Okaloosa County Commissioners, but the Santa Rosa County Commissioners, because it is actually their population more so than Okaloosa's that is being affected by this. But Colonel Dorman asked me to convey the issue. You know, this is not, as Mr. Coots-Rodis and I, when we were in Tallahassee, it's not the school districts. We're not solving a problem for the school district. We're trying to do this for the community, and one of the things, in addition to the traffic, which when it backs up in front of the flight line, has the potential to affect missions. And bear in mind, the 1st Special Operation Wings conducts missions in Afghanistan that are launched from Hurlburt. So if a mission is delayed because traffic is in front of the flight pattern, it's a very significant military problem. The additional thing is the fire department's ambulance services on Hurlburt have a what's the word? Local agreement. So they service with the civilian counterparts. They provide service to the communities that surround, and in the afternoon the traffic backs up on Hurlburt on the arterial roads, and those first responder vehicles cannot get out of their buildings on Hurlburt to service the local community. So the problem is much greater than just it appears as a daily traffic jam and inconvenience.
And also, Ms. Ivanchek, what this will do will provide Flarosa with their own fleet of buses. We'll be able to start school later and be able for the children to get out later or earlier, whichever is best. And it'll help, because if you've ever been down there, well, and I'm sure you have, it's a mess.
Yep, I know.
It's a mess in the morning and it is a mess in the evenings, and it's dangerous because people are having to come out and make a left, and that is very dangerous. So we are very hopeful that this will not be marked off of something that it wasn't supposed to be marked off of.
I know that they've tried to do a different pattern at Flarosa, but that's not worked. There's just not a way to do that, so you have to back up at that light there. There's just no other choice, and so
No other
yeah.
way in is the
Yeah.
problem.
And so is this correct that the only expense, Mr. Kelly, to the district is not the buses, because that'll be paid for, would be the drivers, getting the drivers for these buses, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And of course, we've had a challenge getting bus drivers,
have.
but still, that would hold us back from trying to do this.
But it will also free up those buses that are servicing that particular school to be able to do other things, which could make routes shorter. I'm hoping that this will alleviate a lot of problems there, because sometimes Flarosa is so far out there. If we needed to evacuate children off there because of its location, and that's all I'm going to say about that. This
Right.
would provide an opportunity to get those kids off and on that school property.
So, what's the time frame for this, or timeline?
Well, if the board approves this on Monday evening, there's a form called, it's a legislative budget request, and I will submit that on Tuesday, because there is a check mark that says the local governing agency has approved this. It will go to bill drafting, and the legislature is currently only in committee week. So it will go into what they call bill drafting. Senator Broxson and Representative Ponder will be the chairs of the sponsors in the House and the Senate respectively. It will be assigned a bill number, and then we will then be able to help shepherd it through the legislative process. The legislature meets, I believe their first day is March 6th for 60 days. And if it goes all the way through the legislative session, it's then part of the budget, which goes to the governor's desk. And as we know, he has 30 days upon arrival. So towards the end of April, May would be, if it goes all the way through, to be approved. Now, we specifically, because the legislature, last year the legislature started in January, this year it starts in March. So we have asked for this so that we would have a year. If the governor approves it, let's just say June 1st, it would not occur until the following school year. So we're in 18, 19, 19, so it would be 2021? Yes.
Yeah.
And so that would give purchasing and all that, they don't, as Mr. Kutsaratus, they don't have buses sitting there waiting for us. They have to be ordered and all that. So we would have approximately a year to get the equipment, drivers, and implement this at Flarosa.
And how long does it take, Mr. Kutsaratus, when we order a bus? It has to be manufactured after it's ordered. So it's not like that, like a car lot. You can't just go pick them out.
If we order them at the end of session, we usually get them sometime between November and January. So mid-year, the following year is when we'll actually get the buses or the vehicles that we order.
Well, maybe that'll be enough time to find the bus drivers.
Yeah.
Well,
Maybe if they're only contained at Flarosa.
Thank you,
We-
Mr. Kelly. This
Okay.
is great.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to just comment too. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that money that was approved last year is still there.
Yes.
Right. So one of the things Senator Broxson pointed out was, and to answer your point, this actually got all the way through the legislature. So it was in the legislature's budget that was approved. So the governor has authority to line item veto, but he can't add, he can't add items in. He can only subtract. So the legislature appropriated the funds, which then were not used. Well, the legislature, they only meet that once, that budget's only approved once a year. So the funding that was approved last year didn't get it doesn't go somewhere else. It is sitting there in a by the way, in the foundation meeting, we didn't give thanks to Melissa O'Malley, who is our staff accountant for the foundation, and Ms. Scallon's department. I don't know how they keep the unrestricted, restricted, and all the strings, but the same people in Tallahassee that do that, the money is sitting there waiting for somebody to do something with it. So there is a funding source at the state level.
Great. So that's good.
Chairman, if I may.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The only thing that concerns me about it, and I supported this last year, and the governor vetoed it, that's what happened. And hopefully that won't happen this year. We have a new governor. The only concern I have is the cost of the bus drivers. I think the way I added it up, it's $300 and some thousand a year. Is that correct?
I think our concern is just finding the bus drivers.
Well, our concern ought to also be how do we pay for it? Rita, how are we going to, that's over 10 years, that's according to my calculation, $3.4 million. How are we going to pay for that? Well, of course we would have, but the money has to come from somewhere. What's our plan?
Well, we'll have to see how much we get in revenue.
Okay, well, according, to the numbers, that's, the buses are 100,000 or so.
Each, they're about 110,000 each.
Okay, so that's about $1.3 or $4 million for the buses that last 10 years or more, and we're going to be paying $3.4 million for the drivers. So it looks to me that this is going to be a pretty substantial cost to the district. And the only thing that I wonder is, have we looked at other alternatives to ease the problem? I took a little tour of part of Florida last week and went through a whole lot of school zones and noticed that the speed limits were varied a lot. Some were 20, some were 25. I even saw some at 45. Have we looked at other ways to alleviate this problem? And I understand we worked hard on this and they appropriated the money, but after realizing the amount of money that we're going to put into it, I would sure like to know, are there other ways that we can make this issue better without obligating ourselves for millions and millions of dollars?
There has been looked at how the traffic, and I'm going to defer to Mr. Koutsaratis or Mr. Bolton on improving the parking lot and how traffic ingresses and egresses. We have talked to the Department of Transportation as with the governor's authority that they can add up to a quarter of a mile of a turn lane to increase, and I think right now there's about 600 feet that they could add to get more cars, because part of the problem is the car line backs up onto Highway 98, and so the DOT is looking at putting in a couple of additional 100 feet to increase the size of the turn lane and improving the parking lot. I think it's worth pointing out the school, I believe, was built in 1969 or 70, and kids walk to school, and now Florosa has very few, but the core problem is, and I think it's worth backing up like Ms. Ivanchek, so the situation was created because they funded that overpass, which those of us that go that way, the overpass is an awesome thing, but when the safety lights come on, they have to be on, and the issue is when Hurlburt's traffic releases, it comes out right into that safety zone. And so the real challenge, the county engineers have looked at this, and the real challenge is changing that start light. The safety light, the timing, because this board has taken a position to not remove that safety zone. And so,
we're talking about that stoplight there, right?
Right, yes, sir. And so we've just been looking at how do we change the start time and end time of Floros Elementary. And this was, as all the options we've looked at is, what can we do to change the start and stop time? And I would defer to the other Mr. McGinnis on the logistics of changing the bus routes just was not a feasible option.
I think he might be busy.
Yes,
worrying
he's
about
got other.
a bridge right now.
He's got other transportation problems at the moment.
So we have not looked at changing the speed zone in the school district. Does that have any ability to factor into a solution?
Well, that was the first thing that Colonel Dorman came and asked us to
I
do.
thought it was.
Is change the speed limit of the flashing school zone. And so that's something that the board, that's your decision, whether that's something you want to even look at.
And it's currently 25 miles an hour, correct?
I believe it's 25 at this
And
point.
right out here, it's 35 miles an hour.
That's right.
But this one is not technically a.
Right, and I was going to say,
Right.
I was going to say that this is.
And the problem with changing the times, you would have to change the start time, end time of the school, let out, let in. It is at the end of the line. And so when you have to work the transportation routes and everything, as Mr. McGinnis has informed me, it's a near about impossibility, which is why we're exploring this other option of just having its own little bus route with those buses there, kind of like Laurel Hill and Baker.
And what does changing the speed limit have effect on it? You're talking about the buses themselves, from going from 25 to 35. What effect does that have on the traffic flow there?
Well, the DOT now, they don't recognize a zone like out here at that 35 speed limit. A school safety zone is technically supposed to be, I believe, 25 miles per hour. And we do have other speed limits out there, and we have submitted through the School Safe Zones project that the state DOT runs. We've submitted all of our signs to get them standardized and get new signs, and as well as get them standardized. That was submitted a couple years ago. That takes it's a 3, 4, 5 year process, but we have submitted to do that.
Well, I drove through 4 school districts this weekend, and the speeds were 35, 45 in some, 25 in some, but they all were different. Are they violating state law, or do we know categorically that that's not allowed? And I know you can't answer that question, but we need to.
Well, I think that it's important that we maintain the safety of that area for kids. And yeah, we could raise the speed limit, sure we could, but I would never recommend that, because there are little kids out there that I just don't see how we could justify doing that.
I think the problem is greater than Floros Elementary School, and it was, I think, the management of that highway, well, the non-management of that highway and allowing the growth, I think has, whatever we do, I still don't think it's going to be the solve-all for
It's
the
not going to
problems.
solve it.
No, and that's the hesitation I have of committing to $340,000 a year to not fix the problem. That's a hard sell to me. That's a lot of money.
One thing we are doing internally, addressing a question earlier, but we have a capital project to move the car riders to where the red light is. And so we have the plans already, and we're getting ready to bid that out. That was a capital project approved previously, and we will that will deconflict some of the getting in and getting off of Florosa, the awkwardness. If you've been out there, the east side where the car rider is empties out onto 98. They have to make a right turn, go to the red light if they're going back to Mary Esther, and do a U-turn. If they're going to Navarre in that direction, then they're going in the right direction. Likewise, if a car rider is parents are coming from the west, they have to pass the front of Florosa School, go down, do a U-turn on 98, and then turn right into the car rider lane, which is on the east side of the school. What we're trying to do is internally on our property is make a lane where it connects to the red light so that we can control that a little better, and ask for the help from the Sheriff's Department in letting those out in mass. And that way you would have lessen the disruption of traffic kind of filtering across multiple lanes to make turns or U-turns or what have you.
And fully support those capital expenditures. Is there a one-time expenditure?
Yes, sir, and we were trying to get Red Horse as part of the project to do the
And they said they would
construction,
help
but now
I
with the
recall.
storm, they said their earliest could do that, it would be 2 years after their priorities are down at Panama City.
And those are the kind of solutions that clearly are supportable. What bothers me is committing $340,000 a year into perpetuity to maybe not fix a problem. So we'll vote on that later.
And along those lines with the changing of the pattern and the red light there, recently, Crestview High School, they had added a light there when the new Publix came in. And so the school and the sheriff's department has the ability to alter the length of that light during take-in and let out. So if they chose to, if they had to, let's say after a football game, they wanted to just let everyone go, they could hold that light. There's access to the box there, and they could do that. So I'm sure something very similar could be arranged at Florosa that could help the traffic flow at that point.
It would, and those kind of solutions may be the way to eat the elephant one bite at a time.
Well, we can, that first step, it could be the first step, making the arrangements and changing the traffic flow slightly, making those improvements. I don't know there's no way to measure what that effect's going to be before we do it.
And I did want to make sure we answered, I think you had asked a question just to make sure. By doing this, it allows us to change the start time of Florosa, but more importantly, it changes the end time so that after the traffic leaves, and I believe the light has to go another 45 minutes and on, that the light is turned off. We would, the vast majority of the faculty has left, and Florosa is cleared out and the light's off by the time the bulk of traffic hits Highway 98. So the objective is to get Florosa in and out and cleared by the time the bulk of the Hurlburt traffic releases. So that's the underlying objective.
Oh, yeah, I understand the
Okay.
objective. That's just the cost that I have
Yes, sir.
some trepidation about.
And Mr. Kelly, back on the bus drivers real quick, it says these bus drivers would be separate from the regular tier, so that means they will only work to drive for Florosa, is that correct?
Yep.
We talked about
Defer to
that.
one of the,
Right, they would be, we'd have to find those bus drivers, and they would work for Florosa, that'd be their primary. Now, we have a bus driver shortage, so if they drove at Florosa and then Jay needed them later in the day, I'm sure they'd be available to do that.
Okay, because speaking of the cost for the salary, I was just saying, if they're just doing those routes, I wouldn't think the salary would be the same as a driver that had to go through.
Every driver, the minimum is 4 hours.
Okay, gotcha.
So they have to be paid their 4-hour minimum
And
and the
benefits.
benefits.
Okay, all right. But this money is not, we're not buying the buses. This is what the state's doing, right?
The proposal would be
Yeah.
for the state to purchase the
So
buses.
our
and
main
then we-
expenditure is this salary piece.
Right.
Got it.
And maintenance of the buses.
Sure.
Which I might note, over 20 years is twice the cost of the bus.
All right, so I think what this particular item is requesting is for a motion to approve the form, the LBR, that Mr. Kelly will submit. And Mr. Kelly, I think you attached that form here.
it
Yes.
should be in there.
Okay.
Yes, sir, I did send it in.
Yeah, and for some reason I can't pull it up. And
I'll make sure with Ms. Crawford just to double check, but yes, I did submit the Senate request and the House request.
Right, and those forms are completed. I mean, you've already done it, you're just asking for
Yes, sir, there is a
approval.
check mark
Right.
on the form that
Right.
says approval of
Yes, sir.
the local governing
I understand.
agency.
Okay, so folks, you may want to take a look at how those forms are written. If board members had a suggestion, might that be an edit that could be done before?
Yes, sir, the
form? For example, the state would pay for the bus drivers?
it's what we ask for.
Well, is that off the table? I mean,
I think in reality, it's off the table. The reason it got vetoed is the people in South Florida didn't think it was appropriate for the state of Florida to buy school buses for one of 67 districts.
we'll start high and negotiate from there.
And so we're going to have to overcome that hurdle.
Right. That was what I remember reading was one of the objection was that they were buying buses. Although my contention would be the critical nature of the military mission is a little unique and different than just buying buses.
Absolutely. That was our argument.
I will simply say that our effort involving different groups this year is a year older, a year wiser.
I think that's good.
So the state rejected this?
The governor.
The
No,
governor
the
did?
governor.
Legislature approved it.
The legislature approved it, the governor vetoed it.
But I thought part of that was a snafu with.
That is what we were told
is-
by Senator
So it
Broxton
wasn't
and,
that the governor said, this isn't good, it was just more of a
because he
weird
was
thing.
assured that this would be signed and would go, and then he shared with us, there was
We-
a mix-up within his staffers. That is what was shared with us.
I can say Senator Broxton and Representative Ponder had met with the governor, and I had met with key members of his staff, and we were all assured, and then we got a different news out of it, and that's
the reason they gave.
And that's because someone else met with his staff too. That's how that works.
Well, and we spent a long time on this, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yes,
sorry
sir. No,
to keep
no,
it there,
it's-
But let me say this. I guess I would be reluctant to vote for or against this item because of the expenditure required on our end to secure the bus drivers, if that makes sense. That's and I appreciate the financial perspective, Mr. Destin.
And I would feel much more comfortable if Rita could at least give us a guess at where the money would come from, or a suggestion. I know that's putting a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, Rita, and we ultimately make those decisions, but spending money that I don't know where it comes from makes me very nervous.
Well, I think particularly in light of what some of the dismal reports we've received from the projection of revenue for this coming year.
Exactly.
And since this might be new revenue, because I think I heard you say that a moment ago, perhaps new revenue, but if it's not new revenue, then it's going to come out of the existing pot.
That's correct. You'd have two options. First option would be to look at the new revenue, if we receive any new revenue this coming year.
Was it 49 cents last year?
47 cents.
There you go.
And whatever that revenue is, to look at that revenue in totality with the budget and to appropriate that money. And see if you can work within the additional revenue we're going to get. But if not, then you're going to have to look, like you said, within the budget. Where can we reduce some cost in order to fund this initiative? I mean, that's your two options, because it is a recurring cost, so therefore you can't go into a one-time source of funds.
Like reserves. You wouldn't want to pay for this out of reserves.
No.
And speaking of our financial situation, this is the time of year we generally reconcile our FTE projected with our FTE that we're actually going to get. Where are we in that process?
Well, actually, I'm waiting on the third calculation, and I called yesterday, because typically we get it before we go home for the holidays, and they're hoping that at the end of the week that we'll get that calculation, and then I'll see exactly where we're at on adjustments with FTE and categoricals.
And we need that information to make a educated decision about this situation. So, there we are.
Thank you, Ms. Gallo. Anything else, board members?
So being new,
Sure.
should we move to table this item temporarily until we get more financial information?
It's a good question. I guess my concern about that would be.
Yep, we have deadlines.
Right, would be the issue. Mr. Kelly has spoken about the fact they're in committees, and I guess there's a time limit, I would think, that they receive these things.
February 3rd, to be specific. So if the board wished to wait 2 weeks, the next meeting is the latest that this could be, direction given.
So I think I recall from the past that having grants and timelines, being able to submit something with a note there that pending the next board meeting, is that still potential? I don't know how things have changed since I've been out now about 3 years, so.
Goes fast.
It does go by fast. But so I don't know if that's something that would help you or
Well,
help this situation.
with like I said, in the form itself, because
And I saw that.
because the school board, it specifically says, with or without approval. And so I would not ask them to take it out of what they call bill drafting, where it actually turns into a law or a bill. And then it actually gets assigned a bill number until the board approves it, obviously. So, but we would have a small window if the board chose to wait 2 weeks to submit it in time to meet the House deadline.
Well, Superintendent, you're the one that recommends the budget, so it would be the expenditure of roughly $300,000+ if you believe in your estimation with your staff that that's an expenditure that we can weather, and weather it as sufficiently as we can, then I guess that we would look to your recommendation for that.
Well, we've had to reduce the budget by $7.8 million a couple of years ago, and we were able to move things around and cut some things out because the way Rita explains it to me, you spend this, you cut this. It's that simple. Is there something that we could take out of the budget that would make this budget neutral, so to speak? And we've done that. We've had to do that. And so finding $300,000 a year when we've had to find $7.6 million before is something we can look at and see if we can come up with a way to cut something else.
Right, and I'm not saying it has to be this way, but these are personnel costs.
Yes.
I mean, this $300,000, this is for personnel.
Correct.
And so somewhere we'd have to try to find that money to move it this way.
And we do that all the time. Right. We do it every day just about. When we need something desperately and we have to say, well, we're going to have to take it from here because we don't have it. Because there's a finite amount of money.
That's it. That's right.
And how you move it is you approve a budget and then we come back to you and say, look, we want to move this from here to here to pay for that. But I would submit to you that we certainly could look at that and figure out a way to do this. But I also would say, this is in partnership with our military friends. They need this.
That's right.
And we have looked at every possible solution we could think of. We spent, I don't even know how long we spent. Got into some pretty heated arguments about this. And this solution was presented. So I am compelled to feel a responsibility to the safety of those students. I am, and I do. That's why I could never support raising the speed limit, but that's not up to me. That is truly up to you. And I also feel a commitment to work with our military partners to be able to help come up with a solution that we all have some skin in the game here. And I understand Mr. Destin's point. I do. I can do the math. I get it. But we knew going into this that we would have to figure out how to pay for it. This is not something we haven't thought about.
We knew it last year when
we knew it last year when everyone approved it. And so I'm just a little bit caught off guard today that this is now a huge concern. And I get it. I get it. It's all about money. I know that. And it's about having the money to pay for things. But it's also about what you value and what is important to the district and what is important to our community partners. Let's face it, if the military were not here, we wouldn't be here probably. And I understand their value, but I also understand the business people and their commitment to getting people up and down that corridor because they want them to get to their businesses and back home. So it's also to the taxpayer that's sitting there in traffic all day waiting to get through there. So there are a lot of things to consider. And I know that money is money. I know that. And I do agree with Mr. Destin. You're looking at double the amount that they're putting in. But we have to consider, too, what are the other intangible things that we get from that. So I just, of course, we'll do whatever you tell us to do. We have to. But I just think it's really important that we weigh our responsibility to this community as well.
I appreciate that, Superintendent. And board members, I guess the terrible reality of this is that fairly soon we'll be approaching the new budget. And it's really technically right around the corner.
It is.
So I'm just wondering if it might be possible, if I'm not sure we can do it by Monday night, but if there might be some insight provided as to what might be reduced.
Okay.
So that we would know where this money's coming from in lieu of it being new money, because that hasn't worked out too well here recently. But maybe if we knew where what could be reduced or what savings could occur by Monday, then this would be an item that could move forward, that board members would again feel like that
and that's
it's
a
something
fair
they can
request.
vote for.
That's a fair request. I hear you.
If you can.
So Rita and I are going to have to.
Well, you're going to be doing it soon anyway.
We are, so we might as well go ahead and tackle this one. But I appreciate it.
And we have 2 weeks.
If you have to.
If
that's
we
right.
have to,
Yes.
yeah.
That's right.
And that's all I'm asking for.
That's fair.
I understand our relationships and our partners, but we have one ultimate responsibility, and that's that we don't bankrupt the Okaloosa County School District.
Right.
And I know that, I've seen the FTEs go up and down. That's $4,000 a student, $500 if we were short on our estimates. That's $2 million, and that's facing us right here shortly. So we need to know what's happening with the money and where this money can come from, this $340,000, so that we can make, an educated decision.
So Rita, we have work to do. She's giving me the look. I know what that means.
Well, blame it on me, Mr.
No,
Destin.
it's fair. It's a fair request. It is.
Right.
I wasn't prepared for it because we had approved it all last year, and so it came as a bit of a surprise.
I think sometimes, Superintendent, at least in my case, let me speak to that, I might be overly optimistic about what the legislature will do for us rather than to us. And so last year, I might have been a little optimistic that we would receive more new money than 49 cents per student. And I'm afraid that it's a little delusional in that I still hope that now.
Of course.
But the reality is that if the past is any predictor of the future, that probably may not be the case again this coming year. So that's enough. Let's go ahead and move on. All right, 8.21. Controlled Open Enrollment School Capacity Report for the 2019-2020 school year presented by Mr. Steve Horton, Assistant Superintendent of MIS, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Sure, come on. Might as well. We may have some questions.
Yes,
this
sir.
is the open enrollment plan.
Yes, sir. This is the district's third year in the controlled open enrollment process. It is a Florida statutory requirement that, in a nutshell, allows for any student in any district, practically speaking, that would be our neighboring districts, but any district in the state of Florida to be able to attend one of our schools if there is an available seat and the parent provides transportation. And so that's something that was put into law 3 years ago. A board policy was created at that time, and so we are at our annual process of bringing to you a school capacity report that provides information to the public in terms of how many seats would be available in a particular school for the upcoming year. Keeping in mind that the COE capacity does not necessarily fill up every single chair in every single room in a school. It is defined to be 90% of the capacity that's reported to the state on what is called a FISH report, a Florida Inventory of Schoolhouses report. There is a Q&A document that's attached to this for the public to see that it hopefully answers most of the questions that maybe someone moving into the area would have. I think folks who live in Okaloosa or other Florida districts are now generally used to the process. What will happen is if the report is approved Monday night, then on the 15th of January, I believe, is when the open enrollment window begins, and it would last for a month. And so parents would be able to go online, complete an application to request to attend a school other than their zoned school. Obviously, if you're attending your zoned school, do nothing. It happens kind of automatically. But those applications will be accepted through February 15th, at which time the open enrollment period closes. And then we would continue, and I know this question's been asked before, if a school continues to have available seats after that period of time, then the district allows those parents to continue to enroll or make application up through the first 10 days of school. And so an example I would give you is military transfers in and out of the district all the time. And so someone from military comes in June, they've missed the open enrollment window that's required by law, but we would still allow them to apply to any school that still has available seats. It is always complicated at best when we're working with projections for enrollment for the upcoming year. We're looking at grade levels moving in and out. So it is the best we can do to manage that situation with the underlying goal of allowing students and families to be able to attend the school that they wish to attend, keeping class size requirements under control, and also, again, just facilities in general. So that's kind of where we are. Hopefully the question and answer document answers most of the concerns. The other thing I would have is is there a process by which a student can or a parent can ask for a special consideration or a hardship if a school is marked at capacity, and that is a part of the statute, it's a part of the plan. So if a parent sees that a school is not available for application, but yet they believe there's a compelling reason for their child to attend, there is a hardship process that goes through a committee that consists of the school principal and myself and Mr. Kutsaratus that reviews those in detail to provide some feedback for that. So there are cases where that does happen, even if it's not often. So that's kind of where we are in a nutshell. I know I've probably forgotten something.
Any questions, board members? Comments?
I just have a comment looking at some of the numbers here, especially with the schools that are closed enrollment. I mean, it's scary to look at the capacity versus the enrollment they already have. Where are we putting these kids?
In campuses in designated classroom space that is officially notified as classroom space.
I like the way he says that.
Well, and the reason why I said that is it leads to the fact that we already know we have an issue with infrastructure as far as with some of these schools. Portable, we're putting them in portables and like Davidson Middle School, one of my schools. I can look at that, and I live right next door to the school, so I see the issues that they have there, and it's just trying to explain to the public this is what we're dealing with.
Well, and keeping in mind too, and I know you know this, is that COE capacity counts the portables that are on the campuses. So for example, Destin Middle School, Mr. Destin knows there's many portables out there that makes up part of that capacity. And so it's not that these numbers are strictly the brick part of the school, it's everything that's designated as a classroom.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Horton.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate
Thank you.
your work on this.
Yes.
All right, 8.22, contract agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County and Northwest Florida State College acknowledging that the Collegiate High School Program 2019-2020, presented by Mrs. Cindy Gates, Director, Special Programs, School and Principal Evaluations, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. This is a regular item. 8.23, revised payment schedule in the multi-year lease with NEC Financial Services, LLC, for Avaya telephone equipment from AGC Networks, presented by Mr. Steve Horton, Assistant Superintendent of MIS, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I have a question for Mr. Horton. Have we already started installing these phones yet, or are we still?
There has been equipment installed at every school. All the phones have not been installed yet, but Dustin just gave me a date of January 30, where we'll be porting over all of the phone numbers. So they'll be moving from CenturyLink to the SIP trunks and Cox. So that's our target date.
So you're talking, they'll have all their phones by?
Yes, sir.
January 30th, every school? Okay.
Can you see him? Make sure he nods his head yes.
Dustin, I know where you live, buddy. So.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. All right. Superintendent's Human Resources Recommendations, Section 9. 9.1, Employees on Administrative Leave, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction. 9.2, Deferred Retirement Option Program, DROP, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction. 9.3, Out of Field Report for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Ms. Karen Peak, Program Director of Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I noticed there was no one listed.
Ah.
That's pretty good.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
9.4, Personnel Recommendations, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.5, Employment Separations, presented by Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.6, Employee Transfers, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.7, Employee Suspension, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.8, Employee Suspension, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.9, Employee Suspension, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.10, Employee Suspension, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.11, Employee Termination, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Dr. White, can I make
sir.
a quick comment? Ms. Jackson and Mr. Chambers. Ms. Jackson, I just want to let you know, as a board member, and I can't speak for the others, but I'm sure they will echo, I appreciate the fact that since you've been in this position, how you are communicating with us about and explaining to us how difficult some of these cases are, but you explained it to us. So I like to take this time to thank you again for all that you and your staff do to help when we get to this point. You know, it's we already have an understanding of what's going on, plus the fact that you keep everything, you have everything documented there for us to see. So
I appreciate it too, because when we have, how many employees do we have? About 3,300. It's quite the task, and they do a good job with that. I appreciate it. They have to keep me straight most of the time.
All right, 9.12, Reinstatement reimbursement of sick leave due to line of duty illness, injury, medical examination, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, recommended by the Superintendent. And 9.13, leave without pay, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, recommended by the superintendent for approval. Section 10, we don't know. Section 11, Construction Program Owners Representatives Business. Mr. Destin, you may want to speak today or hold
Well,
until
I
Monday.
can give you a brief report.
Okay.
We have had one meeting, and we are looking at the security fencing issue in conjunction with some of the roof repairs, and we will be bringing back a recommendation, I think, sometime soon on how to proceed.
Okay, very good. Wow. A lot of work went into that, I know.
A lot of work to be done yet.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Section 12, Information Technology. Section 13, Mr. Attorney, your business, sir.
No report today.
All right, thank you. And Superintendent, your business, ma'am.
Just want to remind everyone that our Teacher of the Year banquet is coming up and our Support Persons banquet. You need to get your money in. If you're going to the Teacher of the Year banquet, that's always a lot of fun. And I just want to remind everybody that yesterday was National Law Enforcement Day. I'd let our SROs know how much we appreciate them and how important they are to us. But I don't know about you, but I feel better knowing that these guys are trained and they're in our schools and they know what to do. The best part is they know these kids and they know their name. And if they see them outside of school, hopefully it will be a positive interaction. But I'm grateful for our law enforcement guys. It makes us all feel better and safer, and to our sheriff for working with us and making sure these folks are here.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, so now we come to board members' announcements and requests for information. And Superintendent, maybe when it comes my turn, I would make an inquiry about our Mid-Bay Bridge preparations. So kind of give you an advanced organizer there. And Ms. Vanchek, I'll start with you, ma'am.
Great, okay. Dr. Kelly and I went to Choctaw High School right before the holiday for the International Baccalaureate diploma ceremony. And that program continues to be one of the best academic programs we have, and over 40 students were recognized at that program. These are students that graduated last school year, but since the IB program, as you know, is out of England, they don't announce the results of that till the midsummer. So these students come back, most of them are finishing their first semester in college, and that was great to see them come in there and get to see each other after they finished the first semester of college and see how they've grown and how they react to that. So that was a lot of fun for us to be there. The next thing is I am on the committee that is choosing or has chosen the non-instructional employees of the year. And I just want to say, even though I've been in the district and worked with a lot of people for many years, how impressed I was. We interviewed 9 finalists after going through the written part, but the activities and the job that these non-instructional workers are doing is phenomenal. What they are adding, I mean, we really could not function without them. So I'm very excited. I'm not at liberty to announce the finalists. That's not my
We're
part.
waiting.
I'm excited, but I believe that's going to come out from the superintendent when she notifies those individuals. But it's unbelievable, and it just makes you feel so good what these people are giving to our students. And it's making life-changing contributions. So I'm again excited to be on that committee as well, because it's just so rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vanchek. Dr. Kelly?
Yes, and I would just echo that. It really was tremendous to see those IB students come back. And I think the thing I enjoyed most, other than their program, was that was the first time they had had a chance to commingle with each other since graduation. They were just delighted to compare notes about their college experience and how funny it was to see students talk about their first semester in college, so that was fun. But I also would like to piggyback on something the superintendent said, is that recognizing our law enforcement, the 3 schools that I had the privilege of working in, I think I had some of the very best SROs that we have out there. And I know, particularly in today's world, I would not feel comfortable being a school-based leader without those people having our backs. And I'm just very grateful that they're there in our schools. And something that Ms. Vanchik said, our support people, one thing that always surprised me when it came that time of the year to have our own school-based people get involved, the paperwork just to fill out to become an applicant, to compete for that title, is not easy and it's somewhat cumbersome, particularly for our support people. So I just really highlight and recognize them not only for the behind-the-scenes jobs that they do, sometimes a thankless job, but for their acumen in getting that report in a timely manner and to be recognized. Certainly well worth it. And then lastly, just to say, Happy New Year. What a great start to our new year having this workshop today. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Bryan.
I just have one request for the board. As you know, I'm on the Teacher of the Year committee, and we have got ours down to the last 3, and we actually have an interview with one on Monday, and unfortunately, it's coming at the time we're doing our pictures. So I was going to ask, would it be all right if we can get it moved up to get our pictures done at 11? So that way I can do the interview and be down here for that. I apologize, but that was the only time we could get that teacher in.
Okay, maybe Jan needs to coordinate that since she works
But I know I
with a
have
photographer.
Superintendent and Mr. McInnes.
I'll do whatever we need to do.
Yeah, so it was 10, we'll just move it to 11. Yeah. The only thing, that's right, would be.
I figure our schedule would be a little easier
Yeah.
to move around than the teachers and
But
everybody
I think
else.
there's a photographer.
The photographer's
and-
appointment, I think,
And
is
then the facility.
Yeah.
So I know you'll work with her, but it's fine with me, no problem.
But other than that, I also wanted to say thank you to our law enforcement. We are very blessed to have some great SROs in our schools, and to have a sheriff like Larry Ashley who has that commitment to our schools and allows his deputies to come into our schools. So we're really appreciative of that. So.
All right, Mr. Destin?
I'm going to echo that also. The actual utility that the deputies have to our schools far exceeds their protection from crazy people with guns. They're there as a moderating or a source of making sure that even the little things don't go awry. I remember back when my wife was a beginning teacher and they were not there. They had lots of incidences with parents battling over custody and just a lot of craziness that just doesn't happen now because those SROs are there. And so I greatly appreciate their work on our behalf. Other than that, I think I'm good.
All right, thank you, Mr. Destin. All right, so Superintendent, I mentioned to you that I was curious about Mid-Bay Bridge situation. Some of you know that I have a significant relative that lives in Destin. So my interest goes a little beyond just the school board and school district matters there. But you might have seen there was an article in the paper today, and in the media, there was a reference to a conversation with me. And so what I wanted all of my board members to know, as my friends and colleagues, I think the media will tell you, if you ask them, that I always suggest they call you.
And we thank you for that.
That I'm only here because you have vested me here. And so I certainly would never want to attempt to speak for you or do anything like that. But on the other hand, when they call, I try to answer questions the best I can. So, but again, you're always invited, and certainly please feel free to avail yourselves of that opportunity should you so choose.
I think you got it.
Right, that's just like, yeah. But I wanted to share that. But yesterday I did have the occasion to speak to Mr. Jay McInnes, and I know how hard and difficult this really is when you're down to trying to adjust bus stops by the minute, literally by the minute, and how it is that we can facilitate and make things better with a terrible situation that has befallen our community. Beyond that, because there was honestly a lack of information through no fault of anyone, I spoke to Representative Ponder, and I think the community should be happy to know that Representative Ponder and Senator Gaynor when I spoke to him, had just left the Department of Transportation trying to get more information about what are we looking at, how long will this go on. And I'm sure you saw in the newspaper that the last time this happened was about 20 years ago. And I'll just say, my opinion is the traffic flow 20 years ago is not the same as the traffic flow is today. And so the consequence of that bridge being out has been significant. I would say in some cases almost devastating in terms of time to travel and get back and forth to that community and within that community, because now all of that traffic, as Mr. Destin knows, is coming out through Destin or into Destin.
Yes, it is.
And it's just it's amazing how dependent we've become on that two-lane bridge. So, Superintendent, I know that you've been involved in preparing some of the information that be distributed and how we're going to try to navigate this, and for how long, we don't yet know. We don't yet know based on the information I received yesterday. So, Superintendent, maybe you could speak to that.
The night that this occurred, I received a phone call from one of our county commissioners who is a personal acquaintance of mine and friend, and he was very concerned. And he said, I know that this is not good. I know this is not good for our schools. And it isn't just getting the children to school. It is all of our employees that live in Destin and them trying to get to their designated places of work. Jay McGinnis and I and Mr. Johnson and Mr. Kutsaratus and Mr. Kelly, we were all, I mean, if you could read all the text in my phone, the minute that happened, everybody, we have an organization within our organization that's our emergency response team. They immediately started working. Mr. McGinnis, Jay McGinnis, I talked with Jay. He had Miss Jinks looking at what we were going to do and how we were going to mitigate this the best that we could. Right. Now, there will be inconvenience, and that's just the part of it that we can't, I mean, we can't change the fact that the traffic by Mr. Destin's Seafood Restaurant is twice or 3 times what it was, and that it is taking longer for people to get anywhere. Not just that, I mean, think about our maintenance guys trying to get out there and get to these schools that maybe have heat that isn't working. But Jay did a phenomenal job, because within maybe 2 hours, Mr. Kutsaratus, they had a plan. But he shared with me they already kind of had a plan, because they always were concerned that this bridge, what would happen to us if something happened. You know, a big old barge, could go into that bridge or something like that. So he had a tentative plan and idea of what he wanted to do. We've been hesitant to put it out because he's been tweaking it a little bit more each day as we've seen problems. I believe it or not, I've had 1 complaint, 1, and that's unusual. And we've shared that with the board member that, you know, that gentleman is in his community. But Jay, I mean, kudos to him for already kind of knowing in his head, all right, if this ever happens, what are we going to do? We also contacted every person in Okaloosa County to let them know this was happening through our call-out system that you guys funded for us a few years back, that has been just, we couldn't do without it now. So folks knew. Principals were on board saying, okay, these are the kids that are in our school. I got with Mr. Horton. I know the kids that are affected. We know to let these schools know, hey, this child's going to be late. That's just all there is to it. No matter if how hard he gets up and tries to get all the way around through Fort Walton and get to Niceville High School. Or a lot of our kids go to the STEM Center and from Destin, and that's a problem. And we've been looking at different things. I know Jay responded to this parent immediately, shared with them what they were doing. So we have not put anything out officially because he was still making some changes. And if you put something out and then you change it, That's a lot more confusing to people than if we know exactly what we're going to do for an extended period of time. I have been led to believe, and you know, Mr. Destin, you probably know more about what's going on down there than I do, that this is not going to be a 2 or 3 day fix. That they have to assess it first, and the assessment itself could take a couple of days. So we are standing by, and just as soon as Jay and Mrs. Jinks give me something in writing that says this is what we're going to do, you will have it in your email.
And that'll go to the parents, too,
Absolutely.
whether it be on the website or,
Absolutely.
or however we could choose to communicate
Yes,
it.
we use our website, we use our Facebook. That's a good way for us to communicate, to get correct information out. I'm sure Mr. Kelly is here. That will be out on Facebook just as soon as we get those. In fact, I expect to speak to Jay shortly about what we're going to be doing, but we ask for the public's patience. We know it's frustrating. We're frustrated. It has changed a lot for us, but that.
Superintendent, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to say, having had to do this on a couple of occasions, and I know you have too, when you start attempting to adjust a bus stop by minutes, and then you're depending on a traffic flow that has now increased exponentially, it is just very difficult to do that. And I know they were working diligently last night.
They were.
Attempting to try to work those schedules out. So
They were.
I just want to put that in there, because it's not like we can just shift things around. It has to be done physically by hand with some kind of estimation of traffic.
Yes,
to
and
make
that's
it
the
work.
unknown, is
Right,
the traffic
exactly,
piece.
exactly.
We don't know, and what if there's a wreck? And
Right.
what if there's, you know, he has to take all those things into consideration, and then we have to worry about, do we have special needs children that can't be on that bus for an extended period of time? What does he do for those children? And if I had a fleet of buses and we had a bunch of reserve buses.
And we weren't on the 3-tier system.
Yeah, and we weren't on a 3-tier system, we might be able to do this, but I want the public to know. Jay McGinnis, I can't say enough about what they've done, because I don't know that it blows my mind, so to speak, to think about, I'm going to change this by 4 minutes, which is going to affect that by 6, or that by 8, or that by 10. So we will be getting some concrete information to you, and we'll put it out on our Facebook and our website, and that should be happening pretty soon, Mr. Kutsaratus, I believe. Okay? Thank you for the question.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Well, that's all I've got. Let's go down here real quick, make sure we don't miss anything. Then we go to public comment on Monday night. No public hearings. You won't have to help me remember. Adjournment, and the public notices are there listed. Board members, do you have anything else? You want to cover? Superintendent, Mr. Attorney? How about anybody else? Staff? Okay. With that, this workshop is adjourned.